The Philippines has asked a United Nations body to formally recognize the extent of its undersea continental seabed in the West Philippine Sea, where it would have the exclusive right to exploit resources, the Department of Foreign Affairs said, in a move that rejects China's vast territorial claims to the region. The Philippine government, through the Philippine Mission to the UN in New York, submitted information to the UN Commission on the limits of the continental shelf, on the extent of its undersea shelf in the South China Sea, off western Palawan province, after more than a decade and a half of scientific research. The submission is a declaration not only of the Philippines' maritime entitlements under UN Convention on the Law of Seas but also of the country's commitment to the responsible application of its processes. The Philippines underscored the significance of the submission in securing the Philippines' sovereign rights and maritime jurisdictions in the West Philippine Sea, noting that the 2016 award on the South China Sea arbitration confirmed the Philippines' maritime entitlements and rejected those that exceeded geographic and substantive limits under UNCLOS. The undersea region where the Philippines seeks to formally establish its sovereign rights under the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea or UNCLOS, covers the Spratlys, a chain of islands, islets, reefs and atolls that has been fiercely contested over the years by China, the Philippines, Vietnam, Malaysia, Brunei and Taiwan. Earlier this month, at the Shangri-La Dialogue in Singapore, the Philippines President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. enumerated the legal basis of the Philippines in determining its territorial boundary and sovereign entitlements.
We have defined our territory and maritime zones in a manner befitting a responsible and law-abiding member of the international community. When we established our Commonwealth in 1935, we put together a constitution that defined our territory in accordance with the international treaties that became the basis of our archipelagic unity. The Treaty of Paris between Spain and the United States crystallized our islands into a cohesive whole. The Treaty of Washington clarified the extent of our sovereignty and patrimony and a line set by international powers. We sought to uphold and preserve the integrity of our country's physical unity through international law. In the West Philippine Sea, we are on the front lines of efforts to assert the integrity of the UNCLOS as a constitution of the oceans. Any effort to resolve maritime differences in the East China Sea and the South China Sea must be anchored on international law, particularly UNCLOS. So the lines that we draw in our waters are not derived from just our imagination, but from international law. We have on our side the 1982 UNCLOS and the binding 2016 arbitral award, which affirms what is ours by legal right. In this solid footing and through our clear moral ascendancy, we find the strength to do whatever it takes to protect our sovereign home, to the last square inch, to the last square millimeter. The life-giving waters of the West Philippine Sea flow in the blood of every Filipino. We cannot allow anyone to detach it from the totality of the maritime domain that renders our nation whole.
United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea defines continental shelf as the submerged extension of a coastal state's land territory, covering the seabed and subsoil beyond its territorial sea, up to the edge of its 370-kilometer or 200 nautical mile exclusive economic zone, EEZ. Under the 1982 UN Convention under Article 76, a coastal state could have exclusive rights to exploit resources in its continental shelf, a vast stretch of seabed that can extend up to 350 nautical miles or 648 kilometers, including the right to authorize and regulate any kind of drilling. Article 77 grants coastal states sovereign rights over natural resources found on or beneath the continental shelf, including minerals and other non-living matter, as well as organisms that are fixed to the seabed or subsoil. The Philippines' undersea continental shelf could potentially overlap with those of other coastal states in the South China Sea, including that of Vietnam. Philippine officials expressed readiness to hold talks to resolve such issues based on UNCLOS. Philippine Permanent Representative to the UN Antonio Lagdamio said the move can reinvigorate efforts of states to demonstrate their readiness to pursue the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea or UNCLOS processes in the determination of maritime entitlements and promote a rules-based international order. Incidents in the waters tend to overshadow the importance of what lies beneath. The seabed and the subsoil extending from the Philippines archipelago, up to the maximum extent allowed by UNCLOS, hold significant potential resources that will benefit the nation and their people for generations to come. Hostilities and tensions in the disputed waters have alarmingly escalated, particularly between China and the Philippines over two disputed shoals since last year. Chinese Coast Guard ships and suspected militia vessels have used powerful water cannons and dangerous blocking maneuvers against Philippine Coast Guard patrol ships and Navy boats that have injured Filipino personnel, damaged their supply boats and strained diplomatic relations between the two countries. After a tense standoff between Philippine and Chinese ships near a shoal in 2012, the Philippines brought its disputes with China the following year to international arbitration. The arbitration panel invalidated China's claim to virtually the entire South China Sea in a 2016 ruling, but Beijing refused to participate in the arbitration, rejected the decision, and continues to defy it. Maritime law expert and retired Supreme Court Senior Associate Justice Antonio Carpio said the Philippines' move was an exercise of the nation's legal right, which is enjoyed by all member states of UNCLOS. The exercise of such right under international law is a peaceful act and cannot be deemed provocative. No country can claim that the Philippines is raising tensions in the South China Sea by virtue of such act. China's sweeping claims over the West Philippine Sea includes Reed Bank, located within the Philippines' EEZ. The area is believed to hold an estimated 165 million barrels of oil and 98.7 billion cubic meters of gas, according to the Department of Energy. The Philippines Congress passed a bill to define the country's sea lanes, to deter encroachments on Philippine waters by Chinese and other foreign vessels and aircraft. The Philippines should take all measures to protect their nation's territorial integrity and sovereignty. The Chinese are not only intruding in the western part of its country but in the south as well. The armed forces of the Philippines cited the passage of People's Liberation Army Navy training ship and amphibious transport dock vessel last week through the Basilan Strait between Zamboanga City and Basilan Province as they headed to the West Philippine Sea. Maritime experts in the Philippine Navy, however, say that Basilan Strait is open to innocent passage for foreign vessels, including warships, as long as they do not linger. House Bill No. 9034 passed in Congress waiting for Senate approval, sets the coordinates designating the sea lanes and air routes for the continuous and expeditious sailing or flight of foreign ships and aircraft, exercising the right of innocent passage. The proposed law will allow the President to issue rules and regulations relating to the management and security of the country's archipelagic and adjacent waters. Transiting ships and planes shall be prohibited from conducting any oceanography or hydrographic survey or research activity, unless permitted by the Philippine government. Enacting the bill, it would strengthen enforcement by the military and other authorities of sovereign rights within the Philippines territory. Saturday's submission to the UN Commission was the second time that the country had pursued its ECS entitlements, after it made a partial submission concerning Benham Rise in April 2009. That submission was validated in 2012, subsequently adding 135,506 square kilometers of seabed of the Philippine Sea. The Department of Foreign Affairs have long prepared for the submission of extended Philippine entitlement to United Nations, and in fact, they mentioned during Benham Rise submission in 2009 that they reserved their right to make further submissions to the West. It was a long interagency process that involved deliberate and intensive scientific research and review. The National Mapping and Resource Information Agency led the technical working group that prepared the latest submission for over a decade and a half. The team worked on gathering and processing of data on geodetic and hydrographic information, and geophysical and geological information to substantiate the submission. At least 6 neighboring countries, all of which have territorial disputes with China, have objected to the 2023 version of the country's standard map, released on the 28th of August by the Chinese Ministry of Natural Resources. The map includes a U-shaped line that reaffirms Beijing's claims to sovereignty over almost all of the South China Sea, including the West Philippine Sea, a resource-rich and strategically important region through which trillions of dollars in trade flows each year. The line extends into the exclusive economic zones of a number of countries. The new map repeats the 9-line claims made by China and rejected by the United Nations Law of the Sea Tribunal. China has put one new dash in the eastern section of the democratic island of Taiwan, while also claiming new territory around north of India. In response to China 10-line map, last year the Philippines issued a statement that the National Security Council and the National Mapping and Resource Information Agency will publish an updated Philippine map highlighting the country's maritime entitlements in line with the 2016 arbitral ruling and the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. The new standard map that will counter China's 10-line map will be the updated version of the administrative map of the Philippines, which includes the Calayan Island Group, Scarborough Shoal, Macclesfield Bank, West Philippine Sea, and Benham Rise region. It also shows Sabah, which the Philippines claims but is not actively pursuing against ASEAN neighbor Malaysia. On July 12, 2016, the arbitral tribunal adjudicating the Philippines' case against China in the South China Sea ruled overwhelmingly in favor of the Philippines, determining that major elements of China's claim, including its 9-line, recent land reclamation activities, and other activities in Philippine waters, were unlawful. Predictably, China reacted negatively to the ruling, maintaining it was null and void. China may take assertive and inflammatory steps to defend its position. The extent to which China abides by the ruling in the long term, and to which the international community supports and seeks to enforce the ruling, will have consequences for the utility of international law as a tool to ensure the peaceful, stable, and lawful use of the seas going forward. Economically, diplomatically, and militarily outmatched by China, the Philippines turned to legal arbitration. The Philippines case, comprised of thousands of pages of arguments and documents, asked the court, among other things, to declare whether China's claims based on the 9-line are invalid under UNCLOS, declare whether certain land features in the South China Sea are rocks, islands, or low tide elevations, and declare whether China has interfered with the Philippines' right to exploit resources within the Philippines' claimed waters. Over the past 7 years, China has expended resources and energy to discredit the Philippines case and the legitimacy of the proceedings, arguing that it would neither accept nor participate in the arbitration. In the months leading up to the ruling in particular, Beijing began a campaign of diplomatic warfare to solicit support from other countries for its position, and suggested in mid-June 2016 that 60 countries had pledged support to China's position, though in reality only 10 countries made public statements to that effect. The Permanent Court of Arbitration's 479-page ruling was overwhelmingly favorable to the Philippines' position, ruling several elements of China's claims in the South China Sea unlawful. Key findings of the ruling include: China's claims to historic rights and resources within its 9-line have no legal basis. None of China's claimed land features in the Spratly Islands are an island capable of generating a 200 nautical miles exclusive economic zone. China violated the Philippines' sovereign rights by interfering with Philippine oil exploration activities, prohibiting Philippine fishing vessels from operating, failing to prevent Chinese fishing vessels from operating, and conducting land reclamation in areas where the Philippines enjoys sovereign rights to explore for and exploit natural resources. China violated its marine environmental protection obligations under UNCLOS by causing severe harm to the coral reef environment with its land reclamation activities and harvesting of endangered species. China is legally bound by the tribunal's ruling by virtue of its ratification of UNCLOS. For long, China has argued that its claim over the South China Sea is historical in nature. Beijing relies on documentary and archaeological evidence, indications of Chinese activity in the SCS spanning thousands of years, to support China's sovereignty claims. At first glance, this proffered evidence may appear to be sufficient proof of China's claims of sovereignty, especially when China's sovereignty is assumed, and evidence is sought to support these claims. However, this historical rights argument has been challenged on several fronts. To further disprove China's claim of historical rights, several ancient Chinese maps, dating as far back as 900 years ago, to the Song and Tang dynasties. All the maps showed that China's southernmost territory was the island of Hainan. Additionally, the 1947 Constitution of the Republic of China also identified Hainan as the country's southernmost part, raising questions over what would later emerge as the 9-line claim. In modern history, China backed its sovereignty claim and related rights over this territory in accordance with the 1943 Cairo Declaration and the 1945 Potsdam Proclamation. After World War II, Japan returned to China the Chinese territories it had occupied, including Taiwan and the Penghu Islands, the Chisha Islands, and the Nansha Islands. However, the 2016 Arbitral Tribunal under the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea invalidated China's historical claims over the disputed waters of the South China Sea. The tribunal dealt with the question of whether China's claims to historic rights within the 9-line, now 10-line were in conformity with UNCLOS. It was first observed that this area, in which China claimed rights, formed in the long historical course, to living and non-living resources like fisheries and petroleum resources, partially overlaps with areas that would otherwise comprise the exclusive economic zone or the continental shelf of the Philippines. In the view of the tribunal, UNCLOS establishes a comprehensive maritime zones regime and allocates rights in these areas to the coastal state and other states. In the areas of the EEZ and the continental shelf, the coastal state enjoys exclusive sovereign rights to the exploitation of living and non-living natural resources. Concerning the rights of other states in these areas, the tribunal found that UNCLOS does not permit the preservation of the historic rights of any state within the EEZ or the continental shelf of another state. Accordingly, the tribunal concluded that China's claims were contrary to UNCLOS and exceeded the geographic limits imposed by it. The award addresses three main substantive issues. First, the so-called 9-line and China's claim to historic rights in the South China Sea. Second, the status of certain maritime features in the South China Sea. And third, the legality of Chinese activities in the South China Sea.